When my mom cut me out of the will and left everything to my brother, I thought I'd lost everything, but a secret she buried years ago came to light and it changed everything, including who really deserved the inheritance, and who would be exposed for the lies they told. This story has twists no one saw coming. Alright, I never thought I'd be the type of person to spill their life story to the internet, but I've been holding on to this for a while, and I figured maybe if I tell it like I would to a friend over coffee, except, a friend who has a few hours to spare, maybe I'll finally feel like I've said what I needed to say. So here goes. The story starts on the day of my mom's funeral, or at least, that's when the truth started to crack through the polished surface of my so-called perfect family. Now before I tell you what happened that day, you need to know a few things about my mom and my brother. See, my mom, Judith, was this charming, well-respected Southern woman who knew how to make everyone feel like they mattered unless you were me. I was the middle child, the problem, as she used to call me when she thought I wasn't listening. My brother Daniel, on the other hand, was the golden boy. He was handsome, good at sports, got straight A's, and could sell ice to a polar bear with how smooth he was. He could do no wrong in her eyes, and even though I tried to be the responsible one, worked 2 jobs through college, helped pay for her medications when Daniel was too busy finding himself in Europe, I always came in second, if I even placed at all. Anyway, back to the funeral. We were all standing around in our stiff black clothes pretending to be devastated. Daniel was crying these crocodile tears and holding court like the grieving prince, while I stood near the back, arms crossed, trying not to explode because I knew what was coming. The will. Mom had told us she'd updated it just a few weeks before she died from ovarian cancer, and I remember thinking, maybe, just maybe, after everything, she'd do the right thing and split things fairly between us. But nope, not even close. I found out she'd left the entire estate to Daniel, the house, the antique furniture, the lake cabin, her retirement accounts, everything. There was a clause that said I'd receive a modest sum for my independence, a check for 10 grand, like a pat on the head before being shoved out the door. And you know what's worse? Daniel had the audacity to act surprised. He put on this fake shocked face like, oh my god, I had no idea, I thought she'd split it. But he didn't fool me for a second. I knew he'd manipulated her, probably been in her ear while she was weak and scared, feeding her lies about how I didn't need her help, how I'd always been the strong one, the independent one. It made me sick, but I didn't say anything that day. I clenched my jaw and nodded when the lawyer looked at me with those apologetic eyes, and I walked out of there with my head held high and my hands shaking. But that's not even the worst part. The worst part came 3 days later when I got a letter from an old woman named Mabel who said she used to work for my mom when I was a baby. She said she had something I needed to see, so I drove 2 hours out to her little house in the middle of nowhere, expecting I don't know what, maybe some kind of apology from the universe, and what she handed me, this faded manila envelope, cracked the story of my family wide open. Inside were hospital documents, pictures, and a birth certificate, and right there in black and white was something I'd never imagined in a million years. I wasn't Judith's biological daughter. She'd adopted me when I was just a few weeks old, and not just adopted me, she'd stolen me. Mabel told me my real mother was a scared 16-year-old girl who worked as a cleaner in the hospital and had been told her baby died during delivery, only that wasn't true. My mom had been friends with one of the nurses, and apparently she'd arranged the whole thing. She couldn't have more kids after Daniel, and when she found out about the baby, she used her connections to make sure the girl never saw her baby, me, and that's how I ended up in her house, raised as her daughter, but always treated like I didn't quite belong. And now I knew why I didn't. I went home that night and pored over those documents for hours, trying to make sense of what it all meant, and that's when the fury really kicked in, not just at the betrayal in the will, but the betrayal of a lifetime. She lied to me every single day, made me feel like I wasn't enough, when really, I was someone else's stolen child. And Daniel, well, he knew. Turns out he'd found out years ago. Mabel said she overheard a phone call between him and Judith when she was sick, where he said something like, "Does she know yet?" And Judith said, "Not unless you're planning to tell her." So yeah, he knew, and he never said a word, not when we fought over the house, not when she cut me out, not even after she died. And I realized then I wasn't going to let this go. If he wanted to take everything from me, he was about to find out just how dangerous it is to leave the black sheep out in the cold, because I wasn't just going to roll over and let him win. I was going to burn everything down, one truth at a time. So I didn't sleep that night, not a single minute. I just kept staring at the photos of my real mother. There weren't many, just a couple of blurry Polaroids of a young girl in scrubs with tired eyes and the kind of sadness you only see in someone who's lost something they never got to hold. And the thing that hit me the hardest was that we looked alike. more than I'd ever looked like Judith. We had the same jawline, same smile, same little scar on the left eyebrow, and that's when it really sank in. I'd been robbed, not just of money or inheritance, but of a whole identity, a whole life I was never even allowed to know I had, and Daniel, that smug bastard, he got everything and still acted like I should be grateful for the scraps. So I made a plan. It wasn't complicated, but it was dangerous, emotionally more than anything. I knew the first step was finding out who my real mom was, where she was now, and whether she even knew I was still alive. Mabel didn't know her full name. Just that her first name was Lily and that she'd lived in a trailer park not far from the hospital back in '88. So I started calling around, libraries, churches, old phone books. It was exhausting and frustrating and half the people thought I was crazy, but I finally got a lead from a retired nurse who remembered the story and said that Lily had moved to Kentucky a few years after it happened, and that she might have gotten married. So I dug deeper. I hired a private investigator with what little money I had left, and 2 weeks later, I had an address. Turns out she was living in a small town just outside Louisville, working at a diner, no husband, no other kids, just her and her quiet life. So I drove out there, hands sweating the whole time, thinking what the hell am I even going to say? How do you tell someone that the baby they thought died in 1988 is standing on their doorstep? I didn't even know if she'd want to see me. Maybe she'd shut the door in my face, but when she opened it and I said her name, her face just crumpled, like her bones forgot how to hold her up, and then she hugged me, just like that. No questions, no hesitation, like she'd been holding that hug in her chest for 36 years. We talked for hours, cried for most of it, and she told me everything she remembered, how she was young and scared and her parents wanted nothing to do with the baby, how the nurse said there were complications, that I hadn't made it, and how she'd never been able to fully believe it. She said she used to sit outside the hospital nursery just watching the babies, hoping one of them looked like me, hoping she'd know, and now here I was, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged to someone, not just lived in their house. And while that healed part of me, it also lit a fire under the other part, the part that was still raw and furious, because Judith didn't just steal a baby, she stole a mother's entire reason for living, and then punished me for not being hers, and Daniel helped her bury that secret like it was some dirty shame they had to keep hidden. So when I got back home, I didn't just sit on that information. I started making moves, quiet ones at first. I made copies of the documents, scanned everything, sent it all to a lawyer friend I knew from college who specialized in estate disputes and fraud. He took one look and said, "This is huge, like, change your entire life huge." I told him I didn't want to just sue, I wanted to expose them, and he said we'd need to be strategic, so we filed a motion to contest the will based on fraudulent concealment. But the real kicker came when we got access to Mom's medical records and financial files. Turns out she made a sizable donation to the hospital back in the early 90s, under the table, and that donation coincided with a sudden change in my birth certificate. The original had been altered, name changed, record sealed, and that was enough for my lawyer to say, "Let's go nuclear." So I did. I leaked the story anonymously to a local journalist who specialized in family scandals and hidden adoptions. I gave them everything, the photos, the documents, the hospital names, even old letters Judith had written to her friend the nurse where she referred to me as a blessing in disguise, and within days, the article was everywhere. Local news picked it up, then national, and suddenly Daniel wasn't just the golden boy with the fat inheritance, he was the guy whose family had orchestrated a stolen baby cover-up. He called me, of course he did, furious and stumbling over his own guilt, trying to spin it like he hadn't known the full story, like he was just as shocked. But I had the phone recording app running when he said, "It wasn't supposed to come out like this," and I told her you'd never find out, and that was all I needed. I gave the audio to my lawyer, who added it to our case, and it turned the tide completely. Public pressure started mounting, reporters camped outside his condo. He tried to deny it all, but the story had legs, and people wanted blood. But you know what? I didn't want revenge, not really. I wanted truth. I wanted my name back, my mother's name back, and I wanted the world to see me for who I really was, not some footnote in Daniel's golden boy story. So when the court date came and the judge looked over everything, all the documents, all the testimony, he ruled that the will was invalid due to egregious and intentional fraud. And he ordered the estate to be frozen pending full redistribution. I walked out of that courtroom with my head held higher than it had ever been, not because I'd won money, but because for the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't the problem child, the outsider. I was the truth they tried to bury, and I was just getting started. So yeah, walking out of that courtroom felt like the first deep breath I'd taken in years. But I'd be lying if I said everything just magically got better after that, because the fallout, it was messy, the kind of messy that clings to your clothes and skin and shows up in your dreams. Daniel went completely silent for a few days after the ruling, no calls, no texts, just a black hole where his smug voice used to be. But then came the backlash. I started getting messages from people who used to kiss our family's ass at every holiday party, now suddenly acting like I was some kind of villain for airing dirty laundry. They said things like you should have let your mom rest in peace or family business should stay in the family, and I swear, if I had $1 for every time someone used the phrase dignity of the dead, I'd have enough to buy the damn house out from under Daniel before the court could even split it. But you know what really got me? My Aunt Carol, Judith's younger sister, the only one I ever halfway liked growing up, called me up crying, saying she never knew the full truth, but she remembered a lot of weird tension around my birth. She said Judith had gone away for a couple months and came back with me like I'd fallen from the sky, and everyone just accepted it because questioning Judith was like trying to argue with a preacher mid-sermon, pointless and socially suicidal. Carol said she felt guilty for not asking more questions, for not seeing how differently I was treated compared to Daniel, and that call helped, because it reminded me that I wasn't crazy. I hadn't imagined the cold shoulders, the constant blame, the way Judith would light up when Daniel walked into a room but barely nod when I showed up with groceries or good news. She never looked at me like I belonged, and now I knew why, but at least I wasn't alone in seeing it anymore. And here's the thing, once the story got traction, other voices started coming out of the woodwork. I got an email from a nurse who'd worked at the hospital in '88. She said she remembered hearing whispers about an adoption that never made it to paper, how the records room had been closed for cleaning for an entire week after a certain shift supervisor retired. She didn't have documents, but she remembered names, and those names matched the ones on the letters Judith had hidden in her jewelry box, the ones I found stuffed under false bottoms and wrapped in old scarves like secret sage. Better when buried in silk. And then there was the letter from a man named Frank. Said he used to work security at the hospital and had a crush on my birth mom, Lily. Said he always thought something was fishy when she was carted out of maternity without her baby, and then showed up the next week begging for access to records she wasn't allowed to see. It was like all these puzzle pieces had been scattered across 30 years, just waiting for someone to care enough to pick them up, and I guess I was that someone. Meanwhile, Daniel was crumbling, and I mean full-on unraveling at the seams. He lost his job. Turns out the investment firm he worked for didn't love being associated with a national scandal, and his girlfriend dumped him in the middle of a Trader Joe's. According to a blog I wasn't proud to admit I read religiously for updates, I should have felt bad, maybe even guilty, but all I felt was relief, because for once, the mask was off, and everyone could see him for who he really was, not just a greedy jerk but a coward who stood by while our mother built a life on a stolen child and never once thought to do the right thing. And here's the kicker, the final twist in the knife. During all this, I started looking deeper into the finances, not just the will, but Mom's investments, her properties, her donations, and I found something she never meant anyone to see, a second will, drafted 3 months before the one Daniel had filed, and this one told a different story. In it, she split the estate evenly between us, me and Daniel 50-50, and attached a handwritten letter saying she knew she hadn't been fair to me, that she hoped this would be a start to repairing the damage. It wasn't notarized, so legally it didn't hold the same weight, but emotionally it meant everything, because even if it came too late, it meant she knew, deep down, she'd done wrong, and for whatever reason, fear, guilt, pressure from Daniel, she let herself be convinced to change it again before she passed. That letter became my anchor, not because I needed her forgiveness, but because it proved I hadn't imagined the cracks in her love, and it also gave me the strength to do something I never thought I'd do: reach out to Daniel. I wrote him a letter, not to apologize, not to make peace, but to tell him the truth. I told him I found the other will, that I forgave him for standing by, but I would never forget it, that I hoped one day he'd understand what it meant to have your life rewritten without your consent, and I didn't expect him to respond, but he did. 1 week later, a short letter with 5 lines, "I'm sorry. I knew. I didn't think you'd ever find out. I didn't want to lose everything." I guess I lost anyway. I didn't cry when I read it, I just folded it up and stuck it with the rest of the letters, one more piece in the long paper trail of betrayal and regret, and then I got in the car, drove back to Kentucky, and surprised Lily at work with the deed to the lake cabin. I'd asked the court to give it to me in the redistribution, and they had. It wasn't worth much, but to her, it was everything, and I told her, "This was stolen from you once, it's yours now," and we stood They're in the parking lot of that greasy diner, hugging each other like we were rewriting our own ending, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the outsider anymore. I felt like someone who'd finally come home. I guess the strangest part about getting justice, real, raw, messy justice, is that it doesn't come with the satisfaction you imagine. It's not like the movies where the music swells and the screen fades to black and you ride off into the sunset with a clean heart and a smile on your face. No, in real life, it's quieter, heavier. It sits with you at breakfast and whispers at night when you're brushing your teeth, reminding you of everything that led up to this point, all the things you had to uncover, confront, sacrifice, and in my case, it also came with silence, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that sits between people like a wall. Like with Daniel. After that letter, we didn't talk for almost 5 months, and in that time, I tried to rebuild what I could. I started therapy, which I should have done years ago. I spent time with Lily, who was slowly opening up more about her life, how she tried to move on but never stopped wondering, how every baby she saw made her ache, how she never had the strength to look for me because she truly believed I was dead, and I started to see the other side of grief, not just mine, but hers too, and it softened me, just a little, made the sharp edges inside me dull down enough to breathe without feeling like my chest was full of glass. I fixed up the lake cabin, turned it into a place that felt warm and lived in instead of like some cold legacy left behind by someone who never wanted me to have it, and slowly, word started spreading. In town, people stopped side-eyeing me at the grocery store. Some even offered kind words. Good on you, they'd say, or took guts to stand up for yourself like that. And even though most of them didn't know the full truth, it felt like I was finally being seen as something other than a cautionary tale or family embarrassment. Then, out of nowhere, Daniel showed up. Not a call, not a warning, just pulled into the cabin driveway in his beat-up Lexus and stepped out like we were meeting for coffee. He looked like hell, thinner, paler, like the weight of everything had finally caught up to him, and for a second, I didn't know what to do. I just stood there on the porch with a hammer in one hand and a cup of paint water in the other. He raised his hands like he was surrendering and said, "I don't want anything, I just need to talk," and against my better judgment, I let him. We sat on the porch, both of us watching the lake like it might say something for us, and he told me he'd been in therapy too, that he didn't expect forgiveness, that he hated himself more than I ever could, but mostly, he wanted me to know that Mom, Judith, had been different with him too, that she hadn't just turned her back on me, but that she controlled every part of his life, made him feel like love was a reward for obedience, like everything he had was conditional, and that when he found out the truth about my birth, he'd panicked, thought if I found out, I'd destroy everything, and honestly, he wasn't wrong. I did destroy it, but not for revenge, for truth, and I told him that. I said, "You didn't protect her legacy, Daniel, you protected her lie," and he nodded like he'd been waiting to hear that, and then he reached into his bag and pulled out a small box. Inside was the locket Mom always wore, the one she said was from her grandmother, but inside wasn't her grandmother's photo, it was mine, as a baby, and a note folded into a square that said, "I never deserved you, but I loved you in the only way I knew how," and I'll be honest, that broke me a little, because I didn't know what to do with it. I still don't. I kept it, though, not because it changed anything, but because it reminded me that people are complicated, broken, and sometimes love is too. Daniel stayed for 2 days, helped me paint the porch, didn't ask for anything, didn't try to explain too much, and when he left, he said, "I know I lost you, and maybe that's fair, but if there's ever a crack in that door, I'll be here," and I didn't say anything, just nodded, because forgiveness isn't a switch you flip, it's a door you leave unlocked in case one day you feel like opening it. And after he left, I sat in that silence again, only this time it felt different, not like a wall, but like a pause, the kind that comes before something new. And over the next few weeks, things started shifting in small, unexpected ways. Lily and I started planning a trip to the coast, something she said she always wanted to do but never had the time or money for, and I started writing again, not legal briefs or bitter letters, but stories, fiction, truth dressed up in pretend, and it helped me make sense of all the parts of my life that didn't fit neatly into categories like good or bad, right or wrong, because the truth is, most of life lives in the in-between, in the messy, imperfect, gray areas where people hurt each other and heal and try again anyway, and maybe that's what this whole story was really about, not revenge, not inheritance, but reclaiming something deeper, identity, truth, love that was stolen and then found again in the wreckage. I didn't get everything I wanted, but I got something better, a clean slate, a real mother, a home that felt like mine, and a name that finally meant something real. It's been a year now since everything blew up, and I still have days where it all hits me out of nowhere, like I'll be driving to the hardware store or making coffee and suddenly remember that for most of my life, I didn't even know my own beginning, and now I do. Now I carry it with me, like a second skin, worn and strange but finally fitting. The lake cabin became home in a way that nothing else ever did. Not the cold little room I grew up in, not the dorms I worked 2 jobs to afford, not the soulless apartments I bounced between while Daniel was getting handed vacation homes and trust funds. This cabin, this space that once belonged to Judith, the woman who raised me but never really saw me, now it's full of color and warmth, and people who actually want to be in my life. Lily visits every weekend. She brings pie she swears she didn't buy at the store, and every time she sets one down on my table, she looks at me like she's still waiting to wake up and find out I was just a dream. And I get it, I really do, because there's still a part of me that thinks none of this should have been possible, that I was supposed to fade into the background like I'd always been taught to, that people like me, the black sheep, the backup kid, the one who never quite fit, were supposed to settle for scraps, for silence, for invisibility. But I didn't. I fought for the truth, and the truth fought back, but in the end, I won more than just a court case. I won my damn life back, Daniel. And we're not close, not really, but we talk now, here and there. He sends photos when he's at a new job site or when he finishes a book he thinks I'll like, and I send back one-word replies because I still don't trust him enough to give more, but I'm trying, and I think maybe he is too. He's rebuilding, slowly, working construction now, living small. And last week he called just to say he got a dog, a rescue, black and shaggy and named Boomer, and I could hear something in his voice I hadn't heard since we were kids, softness, humility maybe, and for a second, I saw the version of him that could have existed if Judith hadn't poisoned everything with her control and secrets. And I guess that's what grief really is, not just missing the dead, but mourning what could have been, what should have been, and choosing to move forward anyway. Lily and I finally took the trip to the coast. We walked the beach at sunset and didn't say much, just let the wind and the waves talk for us, and when we got back to the hotel, she handed me a tiny box. Inside was a ring, not fancy, not expensive, just a thin band with a little heart carved into it. She said it was her mother's, the only thing she kept after she was kicked out for getting pregnant, and now she wanted me to have it, and I cried, not like a movie cry, not graceful or quiet, but messy and loud and real. Because I realized in that moment that love doesn't have to be perfect to be powerful, it just has to show up, over and over, even when it's scared, even when it's late, even when it was stolen and buried and forgotten. If it finds a way back, it counts. The media circus faded eventually, like they always do, new scandals, new stories, and mine became yesterday's news, but I kept every article, every printed headline, not for revenge or proof, but as a reminder of what I survived. Because sometimes when you grow up in the kind of family where love is currency and truth is negotiable, surviving is the greatest rebellion of all. And now I tell my story, sometimes at small events, sometimes in local libraries, sometimes just to one person sitting across from me who says, I think I'm going through something like that, and I don't offer advice or solutions. I just say, I believe you, because I know what it's like to not be believed, to be the only one screaming in a room full of people pretending nothing's wrong. And I promised myself I'd never let someone feel that alone if I could help it. So yeah, maybe I didn't get the life Judith planned for me, but thank God for that, because I got something better. I got truth, I got real family, I got peace, and most of all, I got to become the person I was always meant to be, not the secret, not the mistake, not the shame, but the survivor, the fighter, the daughter who came home. Thanks for watching. If you liked the story, hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more crazy twists. See you in the next one.